What's up, guys? It is Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com. Thank you for joining me for Tarantula Tuesday. If you're new here, I put out tarantula videos every single Tuesday, tarantula facts, weird things about my tarantulas, anything tarantula related. And if you are not new, thank you so much for coming back. I'm so glad to have you joining me, and feel free to leave a comment because I love getting to know you guys in the comments. And before I get too far into this, we have Spidey on the other side of this tank being a bad girl. She is my Grammostola rosea. She is the star of the show and she's being a little bit active, so I hope that she does something fun for you guys. She's probably going to be naughty and climb her glass, but she won't get too far. There's a lot of substrate in this tank, which you can't see, but trust me, it is there. Now, substrate is quite a controversial topic in the tarantula community, but we're going to talk about something perhaps even more controversial than how much substrate you use. Today, we're going to talk about something that not many people know about, but you might stumble upon it every now and then in a tarantula group or something. So this is a controversial feeding practice, the practice of feeding a tarantula to a tarantula. Now, feeding in tarantula keeping is actually a highly controversial topic. You may have seen some of my older videos about whether you should feed your tarantulas mice or not. That is a highly controversial topic. Should you feed your tarantulas bigger prey? That is also very controversial. I think another really controversial thing is, of course, feeding a tarantula to another tarantula. This may be the first time you are stumbling upon this information or considering that this could happen. And it may be because you're either new to the hobby or you have a smaller collection and you've never really even considered this, or it's just that you have had the pleasure of being really naive to this practice. But it's not uncommon at all, actually. A lot of tarantulas owners with huge collections will either try to make use of their sick or injured tarantulas and try to benefit their collection with those tarantulas. This is a way of recycling and sustaining their collection. And we might look at this as a brutal practice, and for those of us who get really attached to our spiders, might be something that we can't even imagine, but it's actually pretty practical when you think about it. I mean, we can think about tarantulas in the wild and how they would probably feed upon each other if they had to. Tarantulas are very opportunistic feeders. We could also look at the brutal mating practices of tarantulas, where often the male, or at least one of the spiders, will get cannibalized in the process. This may also happen in a communal setup too, if one of the tarantulas is outcast or rejected by the rest of the tarantula communal. This could certainly happen, and there could be misunderstandings amongst these creatures, even in those settings and with species that do commune together. So yes, this does happen in nature all the time. It even happens in captivity if we're trying to mate our tarantulas, or if we actually do have communal setups. But for a lot of people, to think that some tarantula owners would actually do this intentionally could be very bothersome and perhaps looked at as inhumane. Now, I personally would never do this to my tarantulas, but many people can and do. It really comes down to personal choice and how squeamish some of us may be. And I am very squeamish. I'm also very attached to my tarantulas, so I likely would have a very hard time trying to wrap myself around this. But it could be more useful to look at the objective pros and cons before we judge too much. So the pros, as I've kind of mentioned before, is that you are sustaining your collection. I think that for a lot of tarantula owners, especially those with huge collections, that's the goal, is that you want to be able to have a collection of feeders that sustain themselves. You are always going to need feeders if you've got a large collection. So it's kind of this attitude that you don't want anything to go to waste. And, you know, if we're being really objective, a sick tarantula or an old tarantula or a dying tarantula could be looked at as a feeder. And this could be a way to conceptualize your tarantula's life having a greater purpose, which could be sustaining the collection, if their life is used to sustain your other tarantulas who are perhaps doing much better. This is especially useful if you don't think that your tarantula can be saved. Sometimes a molt has gone too wrong. Sometimes a tarantula is just at the end of their life. Sometimes they're really sick or injured and we can't do anything to save them. And sometimes we're even forced with the choice of, do we put them out of their misery or do we allow the death to be prolonged and occur naturally, where the tarantula might actually feel a certain amount of discomfort or pain. For many tarantula owners, feeding their injured or dying tarantula might actually be a quicker death or a death of less suffering than letting it happen naturally. If you have a dying tarantula or a tarantula that's not doing too well, even the idea of tarantula euthanization is pretty controversial because we don't know very much about how tarantulas process pain. There are some methods that some believe, such as putting your tarantula in the freezer. Some people believe that that's very humane and very ethical to do, because there's the belief that this tarantula will have their metabolism slow down and they won't really feel it. There are some people who believe that, no, that's actually very painful. They feel every bit of that. So for some people, they would look at that euthanization practice and be like, that's terrible. I'd rather do this more quickly. And if we can't put the tarantula out of their misery ourselves, many of us can't do that. I can't. Many of us don't want to. Feeding it to another tarantula and kind of getting it over with, allowing them to become paralyzed and then consumed might seem like an easier way for the tarantula to go. It really all depends on how you look at it and what your personal beliefs are. It really is tricky to figure out what is the right way. And, in tarantula keeping, a lot of times there isn't a right way. It really is based on personal opinion. And that's just because we have such limited information. If we actually knew how tarantulas register pain, for sure, and if there have been studies done on that, then we might be able to think about, okay, what is the best way to euthanize a tarantula? But right now we just don't have that. So these are just ways that you can look at it. The cons of feeding your spider to another spider in your collection are also to be dissected. So just like if you were to feed your tarantula a sick cockroach or a sick worm or something that wasn't doing too well, might have something wrong with it, might have a parasite, there's a risk that if you have a sick tarantula, that your other spider who's doing better might have some issues if you feed that to your spider. Feeding your healthy tarantula a tarantula that might be infected with something is usually not a good idea. It's really not known much about how illnesses and parasites transfer from spider to spider, but there have definitely been certain instances where one tarantula in a collection got ill and then a few others experienced similar symptoms just by being in the same area. So I think it's reasonable to think that if consumed, this could happen as well. So perhaps there is not much risk in feeding a tarantula that is just really old, mature, at the end of its life, or perhaps injured is not so risky. But when we're thinking about things like illnesses, a tarantula that might have a growth, a tarantula that has been taken over by nematodes or parasites, maybe it's not the safest thing to do. So those are some of the pros and cons. I might have left some out, so let me know if you think that I have. But really, I think that this is just down to what you believe and the risks that you're willing to take and how you conceptualize how tarantulas feel pain. It's a tricky subject for sure. Most of what makes it tricky is that we just don't know a lot about these creatures, but there are certainly options for whatever camp you fall into, whether you think it's ethical or unethical, or whether you think that even just emotionally or morally you could do it as an option. So yeah, I hope that actually this gives you some food for thought, because there are a lot of different practices out there, and this isn't really uncommon. This is something that I recently discovered in being in tarantula groups and just having to stumble across a post. It wasn't ever something that I thought could happen or thought of. And just because of the way that I feel about my tarantulas, I wouldn't have thought of it, but now you know too, and now you can think about it. So I just like to give I just like to shine a light on different things that are happening in the tarantula hobby, whether I agree with them or not. Now you know, and now you have more knowledge. So anyway, let me know what you think about this. Have you ever done it? What was it like emotionally is what I'd be interested in as a therapist, but what was it like for you? What kind of influenced you to make that decision? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me this week on Tarantula Tuesday. If you like this video, please subscribe or give it a like. And I will talk to you next week for Tarantula Tuesday. Have a great one. Bye-bye, guys.